History is full of heroes, brilliant generals, fearless soldiers, and visionary leaders. But the Civil War also had its fair share of idiots, men whose arrogance, stubbornness, or unbelievable incompetence cost thousands of lives and changed the course of American history forever today. We're diving into the biggest blunders and the men who made them, exposing the decisions historians still shake their heads at. Some were brave but foolish. Some were smart but paralyzed by fear. Others were simply in the wrong job entirely. This is the biggest idiots of the Civil War and the unbelievable battles they ruined won. Ambrose Burnside, the man who should have said no. Ambrose Burnside never even wanted his job. Twice he was offered command of the Union Army, and twice he refused, saying he wasn't ready. He was right. When he finally accepted the position under pressure, the war got one of its most tragic disasters. Fredericksburg. Burnside ordered a massive frontal assault against a stone wall on a hill where Confederate rifles had the high ground. It was military suicide. Union soldiers charged again and again and again. Confederate General Longstreet later said, "It was like mowing grass." Burnside's own officers begged him to stop. He refused. A Union general wrote in his diary that day, "We were slaughtered like sheep." Burnside's blunder cost 12,600 casualties in a single day, all for a hill he didn't even need. His men walked away, calling him the Butcher of Fredericksburg. 2. John Bell Hood, the reckless charger. It's November 1864. The Confederacy is dying, but one man refuses to accept reality. General John Bell Hood. Hood was brave, too brave. He had lost the use of one arm and walked with a crippled leg from previous reckless charges. But those wounds didn't slow his ambition or his bad judgment. At Franklin, his army was exhausted, outnumbered, and facing fortified Union lines. Every other general told Hood to avoid a direct attack. Hood snapped, "I will break them." The result? One of the most senseless assaults of the entire war. The Confederates charged across open fields into cannon fire and repeating rifles. In 5 bloody hours, Hood lost 6 generals, 14 colonels, almost a third of his entire army. A soldier said afterward, "We were thrown into the jaws of death." Historians still call Franklin the Pickett's Charge of the West, except this one had no chance at all. Hood's decisions crippled the last army defending the Deep South. 3. Irvin McDowell, the Picnic General. Imagine leading an army into battle against your own advice, with half your men barely trained and civilians following your army with picnic baskets to watch. Welcome to First Bull Run under General Irvin McDowell. McDowell told Lincoln bluntly, "My men are not ready." He was right. Many soldiers stopped to pick berries along the road. Others wandered away to drink from streams. During the battle, the Union Army collapsed into chaos. Civilians trying to flee clogged the roads. Wagons overturned. Soldiers ran past politicians who had come to observe. It was a humiliating spectacle. McDowell wasn't stupid. He was simply overruled. But the disaster became symbolic of early war incompetence. He was removed from command within days. 4. Braxton Bragg, the general everyone hated. If leadership requires respect, Braxton Bragg should never have worn a uniform. Bragg had a talent for making enemies. He quarreled with subordinates. He argued with superiors. He once ran a supply depot and wrote orders to himself, then filed a complaint against himself for doing it wrong. Even Jefferson Davis, his friend, admitted Bragg was nearly impossible to like. On the battlefield, he wasn't much better. At Chickamauga, he won a major victory, but spent the next week blaming everyone for not obeying his chaotic orders. He arrested officers, fought with his generals, and squandered his victory by retreating in confusion. One officer said, "Bragg's army did not need an enemy. General Bragg was quite enough." Eventually, his own generals begged President Davis to remove him. Davis refused. The Confederacy suffered for it. 5. Nathaniel Banks, the man who couldn't do math. Nathaniel Banks was a brilliant politician, but as a general, he was lost. Lincoln appointed him because Banks could attract votes. not because he could win battles. His low point was the Red River Campaign of 1864. Banks miscalculated distances, boat drafts, troop movements, everything. A Union officer wrote, "He could lose an army through poor arithmetic." He marched his men deep into Louisiana, only to discover the river was too shallow. The Confederates were waiting. The gunboats were trapped. And his supply line was a disaster. The campaign ended in retreat, humiliation, and the near destruction of a Union fleet. Banks was never trusted with a major command again. 6. George McClellan, the indecisive genius. McClellan is the Civil War's greatest contradiction. He was brilliant, a perfect organizer. He drilled the Army of the Potomac into a disciplined machine. His soldiers loved him. But when battle came, he froze. During the Peninsula Campaign, he constantly imagined the Confederates had twice as many men as they actually did. He delayed. He hesitated. He demanded more reinforcements. At Antietam, McClellan held Lee's lost battle plans a gift from heaven. He knew every Confederate position. Still, he refused to commit fully. He sent his divisions in one at a time, never coordinating an overwhelming attack. Union soldiers paid for his caution with their lives. Lee escaped. The war continued for 2 more years. Lincoln finally fired McClellan, saying, "If he can't fight, I must find someone who can." 7. Gideon Pillow, the great escaper. In 1862 at Fort Donelson, the Confederates had one chance to escape before Grant closed in. They launched a successful attack and opened the road to freedom. But Pillow panicked. He ordered his men to retreat back into the fort they had just escaped from, trapping themselves again. When the fort was surrounded, Pillow decided to flee in the night, leaving someone else to handle the surrender. Grant rolled his eyes. The war gained one of its earliest laughingstocks. 8. Benjamin Beast Butler, the political disaster. Benjamin Butler had no tact. None. When he occupied New Orleans, he issued General Order No. 28, declaring that any woman who insulted Union soldiers would be treated as a prostitute. The backlash was immediate. Foreign governments protested. Southerners threatened revenge. Even Union supporters called him reckless. In one sweep, he turned a potential diplomatic victory into a firestorm. Jubal Early, Lee's angry old man. Jubal Early was brave, but stubborn, hot-tempered, and disastrously overconfident. In 1864, he defended the Shenandoah Valley, the Confederacy's breadbasket. But Early misjudged Union movements, ignored warnings, and attacked when he should have fortified. General Sheridan crushed him. The valley was burned, its farms destroyed, and the Confederacy's food supply crippled. Lee sighed and called him, "My bad old man." 10. Franz Sigel. Franz Sigel was living proof that a loud reputation can sometimes overshadow a very small amount of military talent. A former revolutionary from Germany, Sigel arrived in America with a heroic backstory, fiery speeches, and a promise that he would rally German immigrants to fight for the Union. And yes, he did bring in thousands of enthusiastic recruits. But the problem? Sigel was far better at inspiring crowds than commanding armies. The moment he stepped onto the battlefield, everything seemed to fall apart. Sigel had a gift not for strategy, not for leadership, and certainly not for winning, but for turning simple situations into absolute disasters. One of the clearest examples is the Battle of New Market, 1864, where Sigel faced a much smaller Confederate force led by a teenage-filled cadet corps from the Virginia Military Institute. You would think an experienced general with superior numbers could easily crush young boys barely old enough to shave. Instead, Sigel managed to lose. Spectacularly, his troops were poorly positioned, his orders were confusing, and at the worst possible moment, he decided to place his artillery where it could barely fire without hitting his own men. The result? Not only did Sigel lose the battle, he became the first Union general in history to be defeated by college students marching into combat in their school uniforms. Even Abraham Lincoln, a man famous for patience, eventually ran out of it. Every time Sigel asked for a better command, Lincoln would dodge the request. But Sigel had political influence, and removing him was like trying to remove a stubborn stain from a white shirt. It simply stayed. Sigel's officers quickly learned the truth. The safest place to be during a Franz Sigel battle was standing far away from Franz Sigel. His men joked that whenever Sigel appeared, two things were certain. Morale went up before the battle, and casualties went up after it. By the end of the war, Sigel had become a symbol, not of bravery, not of tactical genius, but of what happens when charisma outruns competence. He was loved by civilians, adored by politicians, and feared by his own soldiers. Franz Sigel entered the Civil War with a slogan that echoed through northern cities. "I fights mit Sigel." Unfortunately for the Union, the enemy soon realized if Sigel was in command, they were probably going to win. 11. Henry Halleck. Old brains, no action. Henry Halleck looked like a genius on paper. He wrote textbooks, studied European warfare, and earned the nickname Old Brains. But when the war demanded real decisions, Halleck froze. As general-in-chief, he refused to give clear orders. He refused to take responsibility. He refused to commit to anything unless someone else took the blame. Lincoln was constantly frustrated. Generals begged for direction. Halleck would respond with long letters, complicated theories, and vague instructions that meant absolutely nothing. He treated the war like a paperwork exercise while battles were falling apart in real time. He wasn't evil, just completely useless in the role he was given. 12. Joseph E. Johnston. The man who retreated from his own shadow. Johnston had talent, but he also had one crippling flaw. He never wanted to fight. Every time he had the chance to attack, he retreated. Every time Davis asked him to stand firm, he backed away. Every time his army had momentum, he refused to use it. At Atlanta, he ceded town after town, inch by inch, until Davis finally lost his patience and fired him. Confederates joked that if he kept retreating, he would march backward into the Atlantic. He wasn't a coward, just too cautious to be effective in a war that demanded risk. 13. Benjamin Huger. Too slow for war. General Huger wasn't stupid, and he was simply too slow for the chaos of battle. Orders took forever to reach him. His troops moved at the speed of a funeral procession. He hesitated, stalled, and missed every opportunity. At Seven Pines, his entire command moved so slowly that the attack fell apart before it even began. Lee quietly replaced him, describing him as lacking energy. In military language, that means he cannot keep up. 14. Admiral DuPont. The ironclad meltdown. Rear Admiral DuPont was supposed to lead a powerful new ironclad fleet against Charleston. Instead, he panicked under fire. He misjudged the weapons, misread the currents, misunderstood the range, then turned around and retreated. Northern newspapers roasted him. The government replaced him. His whole career collapsed after one terrible, mismanaged attack. He never recovered. 15. Alfred Pleasonton, the cavalry liar. Pleasonton had one talent, making himself look good in reports. He exaggerated enemy numbers. He invented victories. He blamed subordinates when things went wrong. His cavalry was constantly outmatched by J.E.B. Stuart because Pleasonton kept misreading the situation. He created such a culture of misinformation that no one trusted his intelligence reports. In war, that's deadly. 16. Theophilus Holmes. Too old, too slow, too weak. Holmes was already old and sick before the war started, but the Confederacy desperately needed officers, so they gave him a command. At the Battle of Helena, he ordered a disastrous attack that collapsed almost immediately. His timing was bad, his coordination worse, and his health made everything slower. Soldiers openly begged the government to remove him. They knew his age and illness made him a liability. He was quietly moved out of active service. 17. Alexander Asboth, the blind charger. Asboth marched his men straight into an ambush, in heavy fog and with no scouts. His army stumbled into Confederate gunfire like they were feeling their way in the dark. His own soldiers joked that it wasn't the Battle of Mariana, it was Asboth's blind march. He meant well. He was brave. But the lack of basic reconnaissance turned the attack into chaos. 18. Thomas Crittenden. Drunk and confused. Crittenden had the skills to be a decent commander until alcohol got involved. At Stone's River, Witnesses say he was confused, slow to react, and issued orders that made no sense. He couldn't keep his divisions coordinated. He didn't understand the battlefield situation, and troops suffered for it. He was court-martialed, suspended, and removed. Alcohol ruined him 19. Earl Van Dorn, the lover, not the fighter. Van Dorn was known for two things. 1. Reckless military decisions. 2. Women he made impulsive, aggressive attacks that collapsed because he never considered logistics or timing. His headquarters was constantly full of gossip about his affairs. His career ended suddenly when an angry husband walked into his office and shot him dead. His military record wasn't much better. 20. Ferdinand Ransay. The quartermaster who couldn't count. Ramsay's job was to supply troops, feed them, clothe them, get ammunition to the front. He failed repeatedly. Bad calculations left armies hungry, undersupplied, and stalled. Campaigns slowed down because he couldn't keep logistics straight. In war, failing to calculate supplies is as deadly as losing a battle. 21. Gideon Welles, slow and stubborn. As Navy Secretary, Welles constantly argued with everyone. He slowed shipbuilding, delayed decisions, rejected ideas simply because they weren't his. The Union Navy succeeded in spite of him, not because of him. Even his supporters admitted he was brilliant but painfully slow. Sterling Price. The Missouri Dreamer. Price believed he could take Missouri with a ragged, starving, poorly supplied army. He marched deep into the state with bad intelligence, outdated maps, exhausted men, zero chance of success. Union forces crushed him repeatedly. His army disintegrated. The campaign became a wandering disaster. Historians still call it Price's folly, the cost of incompetence. War is a brutal teacher, and the Civil War, America's deadliest conflict, showed how a single blunder could cost thousands of lives. Some of these men were brave, some were smart, some were simply overwhelmed, but their mistakes shaped the war just as much as the victories of great generals. In the end, history remembers courage, but it never forgets incompetence. This was the biggest idiots of the Civil War. And that wraps up the biggest idiots of the Civil War, the men who proved that sometimes the greatest threat on the battlefield was their own decisions. Now it's your turn. Who do you think deserves a spot on this list? Drop your picks in the comments because I know I missed a few legendary blundermakers. If you enjoyed this breakdown of battlefield madness, do me a favor. Hit like, smash subscribe, and turn on notifications.